Water, water everywhere. Greetings, this is Howard Wiig, host of Code Green for ThinkTech Hawaii. My guest today is Lauren Roth Venu. She is the head of Roth Ecological Design and possibly Hawaii's leading expert on why water is the next big issue and what we need to do about it. I like to say that the current wars are being fought over oil. The next wars will be fought over water. And we're going to go into great detail about that. Now, Lauren has many distinctions, one of them being she is 40 under 40. She's one of the 40 most influential business people in Hawaii, and she is not yet 40 years old. She was a speaker at the TEDx on Maui, if you're familiar with TED Talks, Design Inspired by Nature. She's been on Hawaii Public Radio a couple of times, KHON. She's the author of numerous articles on water, and she sits on numerous boards and task forces, very active member of the U.S. Green Building Council. And while I remember, she may be reached at Roth, O-R-O-T-H, at rothecological.com. Now, Lauren, one of the quotes on your website is, "Pollution is just a resource out of its place." Can you start by elaborating on that?
Sure, Howard. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a real honor to come sit with you and discuss some of Hawaii's water issues. The concept of pollution just being a resource out of place is that, things in the water that are often causing a lot of the pollution problems, such as fertilizers that have, nitrogen and phosphorus, those are actually resources when applied into the landscape, they actually help the plants grow. But when we have things like stormwater runoff carrying excess fertilizer and sediments downstream into our oceans, they then become a problem. And that's where the resource then becomes a liability. And so what we try to strive to do at Roth Ecological is actually start to understand that, water in essence is really a resource, and we need to start rethinking how to design our built environment and our agricultural systems so that we can maintain the resources of where they really act as resources and not get off site and become problems downstream.
Very good. Yeah, I should have mentioned that Lauren received her master's degree from University of Hawaii, and she studied under a very big name, John Todd. And I believe your big project with Mr. Todd was the living machine.
That's right. So back in 2000, I worked for a company called Oceanarcs International. That was John Todd's research and development, not non-for-profit. And I was actually brought to Hawaii under a Senator Inouye earmarked project that was in partnership with PICTER as well as the Department of Agriculture to bring what was called the living machine technology to the state. And so the living machine is essentially a natural process of cleaning up polluted waters. And when I say natural process, we look at the entire ecological systems. And so typical wastewater treatment plants, for example, do use the biology of microbes, but don't necessarily incorporate the whole ecology of the wetland ecosystem. And that's really what makes the living machine and natural systems technologies different and special. Because by incorporating the whole ecology, we're adding diversity into the treatment process. And so what may be, again, pollutant and harmful to one organism might actually be food or an energy source for another. And by throwing in all the ingredients, they begin to self-create this system where the ecology begins to break down long-chain organic molecules that are pollutant to you and I, but turn into a food source inside this system. And the end result is clean water, which then converts it back to a resource for us to reuse. So back in 2000, we brought basically an old living machine that was a pilot in San Francisco that was treating wastewater at the San Francisco Aquarium. And it was actually made out of an old shipping container where it was welded into a series of 16 tanks. And through that, we had a couple different trains of treatment. It was located at the farmer's livestock out in Eva Beach, treating Slaughterhouse wastewater, which if you have never seen it, I wouldn't recommend recommend staying away. But anyway, so we took from this unlined facultative lagoon from the slaughterhouse, took that water and then ran it through the living machine in that Matson container, about 6,000 gallons a day. And we began identifying native plants and Polynesian plants that could be utilized in the treatment process at different waste strengths throughout the different tanks. And the end result was water that met Hawaii water reuse standards. The project itself was one of the first projects in Hawaii demonstrating the terminology of bioremediation. And that sparked a lot of interest at the time. We had state senators, we had politicians from all over the Pacific coming to see the technology. And from that, essentially that's where Roth Ecological was born out of. In 2006, I partnered with John and some of the other ecological engineers that I've worked with to basically be the Hawaii-based Pacific partner for the technology. And it's really expanded much past just on-site wastewater treatment for reuse, but really into a much grander picture of integrative water resource management. So understanding how to apply natural systems to manage stormwater, to manage wastewater, and importantly, how we can, again, convert what was a pollution and turn it back into a resource. How can we convert how we sometimes view stormwater as a liability and turn it back into a resource, for example. So there's a lot of exciting things happening as infrastructure is changing, where it's mimicking a lot of the renewable energy sector, in the sense that we want to have some on-site security while also having some smaller reliance, but yet some still hook up to the overall grid and supply.
Very good. And did this go anywhere? Was that a pilot and it's now being expanded in Hawaii with other similar projects?
Oh, that's a good question. So the farmer's livestock was located in Eva Beach off of the old Fort Weaver Road. And then they relocated out to Campbell. And at that time, partners of mine, we developed basically a full-scale system, about 15,000 gallons a day, using a technology called a constructed wetland. And through that process, again, water was targeted for water reuse. And unfortunately, as maybe you know or don't know, all the slaughterhouse facilities in the state are now closed. So that system is still out there, but the slaughterhouse is not operating anymore. But that actual pilot got relocated, and now it's located up at the Nature Center. Because of the portability of the pilot being in a container, it literally can get on the back of a big truck, and it was driven up to the Nature Center, plugged in to the sewer system for the new development. They basically built new administration buildings, and it now serves as the wastewater system for the Nature Center. And importantly, what's exciting about that location is there's Halau Kumana and some of the other charter schools in the area, actually use it as a educational platform to teach the kids not only about their native plants, but then their services in the natural world, but also the ecological services they can have and be applied into the built environment. So sometimes you'll see kids out there holding the pH meter and the DO probe and seeing how well the plants are growing, and really getting a project-based understanding of how the wetland ecology functions in terms of treating our wastewater at that particular site.
I lived in Southeast Asia for a while, and one of the low-tech farmers' technologies was in every farmyard there'd be a big pond, and in the pond would be fish, usually tilapia, and on top of the pond were lilies or other water plants. And the idea was that the fish waste would be absorbed by the plants, and sometimes those plants were edible, so you could eat them. And of course, the tilapia would get big, and there was the protein source.
Sure.
Same principle here?
I think when we teach it to the kids, aquaponics is a great way of showing how the nutrient cycle and food web ecology And when we start getting into industrial waste or pollutants in stormwater, we start have to rethinking about what types of contaminants are in there, how long does the retention need to be in these ecological systems before it's safe again to return back into the human supply and food. And the world has changed a lot. A lot of I can't say that John Todd or Roth Ecological are the ones that invented green infrastructure. I mean, indigenous cultures all over the world have through their relationships with their environment, have devised many natural systems technologies, including the Hawaiians. I mean, in many ways, you can think of the lo'i systems, the taro patches, where they offshoot from the main streams and rivers. It's a way of depositing sediments. In some sense, it's a sediment control basin before it hits the ocean. And then often they would also connect the lo'i with the fish pond. So there was an understanding of nutrient cycle, I think, in a lot of cultures, including both here locally, places in Asia and abroad. And I think what's happened over the 20th century is, as everyone moved off the land and we began to develop more of the built environment, and folks have gone from farmers to bankers, I think our relationship to the natural world has changed and shifted. And so this has gotten to a point where, not just here in Hawaii where we have to prepare about our water future, but on a global level, we're seeing issues with climate change shifting where water precipitation used to happen, and then where it does happen and becoming more extreme. And then how are we going to deal with the issues of water scarcity and also quality? And so the idea of natural systems technologies is really a bridge back into our connection with the spaces that we live in. How can we learn from traditional cultures? How can we bridge it with modern science and technology? And that's really where we're going at it with our approach.
And on that cheery note, we need to take a brief break. This is Code Green, Water, Water Everywhere with Lauren Roth Venu.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Water, water everywhere. This is Howard Wiig with Code Green. Today my guest is Lauren Roth Venu, and we are talking about the fact that the current wars are being fought over oil. The next wars will be fought over water. And speaking of that, Lauren, let me shift to California and the western states in general. I believe the Central Valley of California produces something like 40% of this nation's fruits and vegetables. They are under a terrible drought situation. I personally expect the cost of food to rise. Can you talk a little bit about climate change and food availability?
Sure. Yeah, what's happening in California has obviously been very drastic and dramatic. And the state has taken some progressive measures to begin incentivizing not only water conservation, but non-potable water use on site, which we can talk about as we get talking about buildings, maybe further in the conversation. But with agriculture, agriculture globally is the largest, industry of using water, and so when we start thinking about droughts and we start thinking about what that might affect the agricultural supply, it's obviously directly connected, and of course then that'll create all kinds of issues with economy of prices and so forth. So it's really at a crux where we need to start rethinking how we can conserve our potable water supply and really make use of a lot of the water that in some sense is being wasted. For example, and a lot of places, well, here in Honolulu, we have only 10% of the total wastewater flow is being treated to a level that can be reused. The vast remainder is going out into our oceans. So that is, for example, something that maybe we need to rethink how we're managing our water systems so that we can maybe reuse that water for things like agriculture in a safe way.
Mm-hmm. And you and I both sit on the Hawaii Building Code Council, and I chair the Energy Committee, and you are a very active part of both the council and the committee, and we do have a plumbing code. I see where you just happen to have the 2012 Uniform Plumbing Code there. And it does have, I believe for the first time, a gray water constituent. Can you tell us what gray water is and what the options are in plumbing codes?
Sure. As Howard, as you mentioned, it's been very exciting being part of the State Building Code Council. The U.S. Green Building Council Hawaii chapter has been involved as the Green Code subcommittee for consulting on which green codes might be feasible to move forward as the State Building Code Council begins to adopt new codes. So one of the great things that happened, as you know, was that just recently, earlier in July, the State Building Code Council all agreed to move forward with the 2012 Uniform Plumbing Code. There were some provisions and amendments that were made, but importantly, Chapter 16 and Chapter 17 discuss non-potable water use, and especially with rainwater catchment, gray water systems, on-site wastewater treatment. And some of the other things that got left out, unfortunately, were in the back relating to sustainability plumbing codes. That was one of the appendices. And this was basically just, they're not going to regulate right now or enforce high efficiency, low flow fixtures, which to me is a bit disappointing considering that's a low-hanging fruit for really tackling supply on the front end. But there's a lot of exciting things going on. For the first time, we're going to start seeing the ability to not only be connected to the public sewer and to Board of Water Supply here in Hawaii or the boards on the other counties. And now we can have our own on-site system, such as a rainwater catchment, in conjunction with having a municipal supply of water. And same with the sewer, we can now start having things like on-site gray water use, and also be connected to the city sewer. So it's a pretty radical jump forward. We're not pioneering it here in Hawaii. A lot of states around the country have already moved this way. A lot of the green building industry has been really pushing for this because this is going to really jump us through some of the milestones of really achieving water conservation. We talked about agriculture being a large water demand industry, but really it's about almost half the municipal water use in buildings here in the state with agriculture. So we could really start seeing some big hurdles forward with water conservation.
That brings up a recent news item on the Big Island where in a lot of the very rural areas of the Big Island, the homes are dependent on roof catchment for their water, and it turns out that some vets from the Iraq War moved into these homes, and they could not, I believe it was, get veterans loans because they were not hooked up to the plumbing system, the municipal plumbing system. There was no plumbing system. So Congressman Gabbard, I believe, had to fight very strenuously and finally convinced whatever powers it be that this was the way to collect water there.
Yeah, no, I think definitely we're seeing that banking industries have to start, they have no comparables right now, and that's part of the issue. So it's one thing that we need to start getting these things off the ground by making them legal so that we can have a regulatory process. And then I think once that starts happening, we'll start seeing the loan process. Really interestingly is in San Francisco, they recognize that because of water prices, They made, they were allowed to do a lot of the non-potable water with the municipal systems, but they weren't seeing very much progression with folks just wanting to do it on a voluntary level. There really wasn't much economic incentive. And I think that's going to be some of the challenge that we have here as well. With water as the prices that they're at in the current day, it makes it challenging to get some of those return on investments. Now, the sewer, on the other hand, I think that the counties will still need to figure out what that new rate structure is going to be like once people start having on-site systems, but that'll be an area of cost savings. But what they did in places like San Francisco is they actually put out $250,000 to $500,000 loans for large commercial mixed-use developments to implement non-potable water practices, on-site non-potable water practices, recognizing that that's offsetting the costs for the city to convey the water to the building, the cost of conveying it out of a building to a sewage treatment plant, the cost of treatment, cost of reuse to disperse it again. So they're really thinking in a more holistic, integrated mindset. And I think if we really want to, I think it'll be great to see this get going. We'll probably start seeing the codes coming into play in some of the counties, particularly Honolulu City and County, and probably Kauai. Hopefully Maui and Big Island shortly to follow. But I think what will be really interesting is once it's off and running, if incentives need to come into play here, and how will we really push it to move forward?
Yeah, speaking of incentives, when you look at your Board of Hawaii or Board of Water Supply bill, if you decrease your water use, your sewer charge is virtually the same, so you're not being rewarded for decreasing your use. And as we get into these systems, I think that's going to become a very big issue. And we are working with Board of Water Supply. I think we're going to have to do a lot more of that, saying, please reward those people who have decreased their use of the sewer.
Right. So exactly what you're saying. So all of your potable water bill and your sewer bill are all being accounted for what comes into your household. So as people start thinking about gray water systems, well, in some sense, what will happen is you're going to start using less water back inside your building if you're going to be reusing non-potable water and replacing that the non-potable water with the potable. So in some sense, the bill, you will start seeing some savings. But in terms of the actual sewer, like what's actually going into the sewer versus if you're managing it on site, that'll need some resolve. And I think that the Department of Health and the city and counties, environmental services are beginning to start thinking about what would that rate structure begin to look like, so that for the betterment of the good, the city can keep operating, maintaining the existing centralized infrastructure, but also start rewarding those who are managing it on site. So those are some of the challenges I think that are going to be rolling out as we start seeing these new codes adopted.
And maybe we should have done this in the beginning, but it occurs to me that maybe some of our audience doesn't know non-potable water from gray water from black water. Could you do a little definition here?
Sure. It's funny. I should also mention, just a couple of years ago, I co-founded a nonprofit called WISE, Water Institute for Sustainability Education. And the premise of WISE is actually to begin to break down from potable to black water, the many shades of gray, and their appropriate uses and critical thinking about treatment and reuse. And so when we talk about non-potable water, it's essentially, it's all those grays and black water. So it includes things like rainwater catchment. It includes gray water. Gray water is wastewater from things like showers, laundry, sinks, but not kitchen sinks, and then your black water is things like kitchen sinks and toilet water, as it's stated here in the state of Hawaii. And so when we start thinking about the appropriateness and the treatment needed or lack thereof, we have to start thinking of what is the gray water fall closer to the lighter shades, closer to the potable water, or is it closer to the darker end? And then that's how we need to begin thinking about managing it and what types of treatment technologies need to be deployed.
Yeah, what's happening out on the Eva Plains, where most of our single-family homes are going up, is the city, in its wisdom, knew that this would have bad effects on our water supply. So if you drill down on the Eva Plains, there's slightly saline water, has a very low salt content, nothing that we want to drink. But my understanding is that they have put little signs by the faucets in these homes and says, do not drink or non-potable. But this is the water, that slightly saline, that goes into the landscaping of these homes out there.
Yep, that's some of the non-potable water can also be thought about with having some brine, having some salt content. Definitely the Board of Water Supply with Honouliuli, they're trying to expand their customers with reclaimed water. There's currently, as we speak today, Department of Health is updating the water reuse guidelines. There's going to be a real big push for getting reclaimed water out there. Of course, Honouliuli is right now our only secondary and tertiary treatment system, centralized, publicly run treatment system that can produce reclaimed water. And so they're actually also going to be running purple pipes down the roads for those new developments and looking at connecting up the homes to that R1 water source.
Very good. On that cheery note, we need to take another break. Water Everywhere with Lauren Roth Venu.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Good afternoon. This is Howard Wiig with Code Green. Water Everywhere is our theme for today. And leading us in discussion is Lauren Roth Venu, the head of Roth Ecological Design, and in my totally unprejudiced opinion, possibly the leading expert in the entire state of Hawaii on the wise use of water. Now, Lauren, we were talking before the break about the Honouliuli plant, which is making use of the gray water and using it for non-potable sources. I think of the main sewage treatment plant, maybe I'm wrong, as being on Sand Island. That's the old one. And there's been discussion about treating that water, and the EPA is very interested in us treating that water further. They keep threatening the city with a fine. The city keeps saying it's much too expensive. It'd be $1 billion or something. We can't do that. And as far as I know, it's just an ongoing dispute. In your educated guess, is there some way where we could treat that water better and make some use out of non-potable water for a reasonable price?
Well, Sand Island, as you know, is a challenging treatment plant. You know, if we step back and think about where it came from, which really came out of the era of the Clean Water Act, which was in essence to get folks off of cesspools and septic tanks in a city-urban environment and centralize it all to one single facility. Sand Island in particular was just mostly primary treatment and then disposing it out, you know, safely to our oceans. You know, that was in the 70s, and now, you know, here we are sitting, you know, 40 plus years later, and we have the same technology that we had back then. So as you brought up, the EPA has put out a consent decree knowing that a lot of the pipes have holes in them. The sewage treatment plant is not up to par with meeting secondary treatment standards, which is a standard anywhere in the United States today. And so what to do? You know, the question to me is more of a planning issue. You know, just to go in and spend, you know, $4 or $5 billion to replace an infrastructure that was thought of, 40, 50 years ago and not think about 21st century design and infrastructure, I think would be missing out on an opportunity on where we might be going in our water future. And so I think that, as the consent decree is going to be folding out really for the next 20 years, maybe without meeting, but by still meeting the targets we have to meet for the EPA, let's think about planning and where are we developing? Where do we see places where we could have water reuse? And does it make sense to do 66 million gallons a day at Sand Island to put big purple pipes to pump it all the way back up to the mountain to get to the end customer? Because what is the cost of that energetically, for example? Could we start looking at an economic feasibility study to begin identifying what if we did what's called sewer scalping, which means putting a package treatment plant along the main pipe and meeting to a high water quality for reuse and reusing it on site. For example, the Aloi Golf Course that's been talked about. Aloi Golf Course uses about 500,000 gallons a day for irrigation. It has a space off the main lateral to actually pull some of the sewage from the Waikiki area, which would take the burden off of some of the issues that are going on right now with the sewer in that area. Develop a small system that could be managed and treat to a high water quality to be reused right there at the golf course. And so maybe the idea is to start thinking about planning, how do we do decentralized systems and take the load off of the main centralized system at Sand Island. And that also brings up a point about climate change, because if we rely on all of our sewage to go down to Sand Island that's sitting on the coast where, guess what, we're most susceptible for tsunamis, hurricanes, and so forth. What happens if that plant were to go down, and what would that look like? So if we can start beginning to decentralize, moving our systems up to the mountain, closer to the end use of the people who are going to be using the reclaimed water, we'll be saving energy, but building resilience in terms of potential climate change issues here in Hawaii, and also make it hopefully more affordable. So these are the kinds of things that I think would be interesting for the city to begin thinking about as it's moving forward, instead of just because the hammer is down, to just blindly be going in and just replacing everything as it is today, to begin really planning on what 21st century water management might look like.
At a far lower price, it sounds like. And you mentioned what would happen if the plant went down. A friend of mine who's now in his 80s used to be an aviator, and he'd fly all around the islands. And as he was approaching Honolulu again, he'd be in contact with the radio tower at the airport. And they'd say, "Where are you?" And he'd say, "I'm just going by Kukai Junction." And that was the outfall before we had this plant off Sand Island, and there was this big brown swatch of water there.
Right. Yeah, and I think the plumbing codes are going to help a lot too with the issue. I mean, if Honolulu, mimicked what San Francisco did, for example, and really rolled out and incentivized, the private sector investing into on-site systems, and then taking the load off downstream, that might mean, we might cut the flows in half or more down at Sand Island. So by the time they have to get down there to build a secondary or tertiary system, the cost for the city has been, maybe greatly reduced by half or more.
And the more that individual residences voluntarily or through incentives undertake use of gray water or even roof runoff, that also decreases the burden on the Sand Island plant.
Yes, that's right. So I think what the real trick is I think the city is understanding about the new plumbing codes that are coming. I think there needs to be a real discussion, an integrated discussion with the planning departments and where water conservation is going, like how much will buildings begin saving. So when they talk about pipe sizes and some of the other issues that they might have by reducing flow into the greater system, that they're planning for this as they're redeveloping their infrastructure. And I think that's an important point. And I think that again, if this can be thought of and planned for as they move away from retrofitting the pumping stations and to getting closer to, upgrading the whole treatment works. What might be the best solution forward.
Yeah, yeah. 21st century technologies. What a concept here.
Right.
And speaking of 21st century, you will be on a jet plane before too long. Nice 21st century technology, and headed for Samoa. What is that all about?
Yeah, I'm very humbled and honored that I get to go to the United Nations Small Island Developing States meeting held in Samoa. It'll be the first week of September. And I actually had attended the previous one, which was in Mauritius back in 2005. So it's been 10 years since they've held this meeting. And the primary focus, as the title reveals, is it's focused on small island developing states. So you'll have a lot of representatives from island nations all over the world. Its primary focuses are on things that we're dealing with here in Hawaii as well. Climate change, water and sanitation, renewable energy, transportation, food security, and then of course all of the social issues as well. Gender equality, women empowerment, private sector involvement. So it's going to be a really interesting meeting to see. What I was really interested the last time I went in Mauritius was just, island people worldwide, including here, have innate tendencies to be resilient and have some creative ways where they come up with solutions. And so there's an aspect of going there and learning about how other islands have gone through issues in dealing with climate change and resilience, and also beginning to understand, where is the appropriate private sector involvement, especially with, a company like myself who goes out to try to deploy green infrastructure and sustainable water management systems. And so it's going to be an exciting meeting. I'll be very interested to see some of the people I used to work with way back when in the 2005 meeting. Hopefully I'll come back with some ideas that maybe will help guide Hawaii further, but then also where Hawaii can provide some partnerships to help guide some of those other islands along.
Beautiful, yeah. The coming together of great minds is a great thing.
Yeah.
So we've got a few minutes left. I was looking through your website, and some of the projects that you have undertaken here in Hawaii just look absolutely beautiful. Can you describe one or two of these projects?
Sure. We've had a privilege of doing all kinds of different types of projects, from commercial development, mixed use, agriculture. One of the ones we just recently finished was for a new medical center over in Kailua Kona. And we developed a constructed wetland technology that'll be treating all the wastewater on site. Basically, the way that will work is it'll go through a primary treatment, which will basically be something similar to a septic tank where it'll hold out some of the solids. And then the second part, we have these subsurface flow wetlands. So you don't see any water on the surface, but water moves both horizontally through some of the cells, vertically through the others. And the end product will be reclaimed water that'll flow through the 30-some-odd irrigation zones, demonstrating native plants. We're also targeting nitrogen and phosphorus removal in that particular project as well to protect the groundwater quality in the area. We also have another similar system going up for the new UH Palamanui campus in Kona. So that project's currently in construction, and we're excited to see that moving forward. On a more grander scale or larger scale project, we're working on it's approximate 300 acre mixed use agricultural development on Maui. That project's very interesting because I think they'll actually be able to achieve net zero water. So what that means is we're going to be able to look at all of these non-potable water sources on site and actually meet the water demand for that property. So interestingly, they do have a well, and there will be a public utility on the site. And not just because the client wants to showcase sustainability, water sustainability, he also wants to save money, because the more he can manage, even within that 300 acres, non-potable water sources, he can minimize the size of his pump for his potable water supply that he's distributing. And so we'll be looking at, for example, collecting stormwater runoff from the site, treating that, storing it in ponds and wetland systems, which will be used for the agricultural areas. The homes on the property will all have their own catchment systems. The wastewater systems will connect. There'll be about 40-odd homes looking at on-site wastewater treatment for water reuse. He's looking at developing through all of these processes micro-enterprises that can come out of this property. So that's actually going to be a really exciting, it's a very exciting client and property to work with, really demonstrating the whole gamut of water resource management, almost within his little micro watershed up there.
Well, as we know about Jay, he's a great one for diversifying our economy, getting us off of the tourism/military two legs of the stool. And it sounds like this is a little mini step in that right direction, developing micro enterprises. You have anything in mind for micro enterprises?
Well, I mean, you know, the water industry, I think, has a lot of opportunities for green jobs and growth. And so, again, as these plumbing codes come out, this is really going to open the door for industry. And you know, you'll see folks, I guarantee, coming in with you know, gray water systems that they can you know, sell to the homeowner, to rainwater catchment, to folks who have to operate and maintain. So really, I think that this is just going to open a lot of doors for a lot of folks.
That is a very, very cheerful note to end on. This is Howard Wiig, Code Green, Water Everywhere with Lauren Roth Venu. Thank you very much.